What if the man who once defined an entire era of television, the man whose very presence drew in millions of viewers every afternoon, chose to vanish from the very spotlight that made him a legend? What if the celebrity we adored for decades carried within him a silent tragedy that very few truly understood? Anthony Geary, the actor who immortalized the role of Luke Spencer on General Hospital, was more than just a soap opera star. He was an icon. In the 1980s, his on-screen wedding to Laura drew over 30 million viewers, making it the most-watched daytime TV event in history. Yet, beneath the applause and the fame, Geary's story was never simply about success. It was also about struggle, alienation, and choices that came at a painful cost. At 78 years old, Geary's journey feels almost like a Hollywood script in itself. The meteoric rise, the unbearable weight of expectations, and finally, the quiet retreat into shadows. But here's the haunting question. Why would a man at the peak of fame, adored by millions, feel so trapped that he would leave it all behind? This isn't just the story of a soap opera legend. It's a tragic celebrity story that forces us to confront the darker side of fame, the isolation, the disillusionment, and the heavy price of carrying a role that defined and confined his life. And yet, Anthony Geary's life holds more than heartbreak. It carries lessons, reflections, and a legacy that continues to echo across Hollywood. But to understand the man behind Luke Spencer, we must start from the very beginning, long before the lights of the studio cameras, in a world far away from Hollywood glamour. Anthony Dean Geary was born on May 29, 1947, in Colville, Utah, a small, unassuming mining town where the air was thick with the smell of hard work and perseverance. His parents, Dana and Eunice, were far removed from Hollywood glamour. His father owned a construction business, while his mother was a dedicated homemaker who instilled in her children the value of humility and resilience. Growing up in the shadow of Utah's mountains, Anthony was not the boy one would expect to someday dominate American television screens. Shy yet imaginative, he often found refuge in storytelling, reading, and play acting. The mining town backdrop, with its simple rhythms of life, stood in stark contrast to the dazzling world of television he would later conquer. But perhaps it was this very contrast that made his eventual fame so dramatic. Anthony's childhood wasn't marked by privilege. Like many forgotten actors who later rose to prominence, his beginnings were modest, his dreams even more so. He didn't start with visions of Hollywood stardom, but rather with a hunger to explore beyond the small-town limitations that surrounded him. His teachers described him as curious, restless, and brimming with untapped creativity. It was during his teenage years that the stage first called to him. High school theater productions became his sanctuary. Vintage Hollywood movies, which flickered through local theaters, filled his imagination with stories of heroes, tragedies, and forgotten legends. These films whispered to him there was a bigger world waiting, one where he could reinvent himself. The path wasn't easy. His family didn't have Hollywood connections, and pursuing acting seemed almost unrealistic. Yet Anthony was relentless. He enrolled at the University of Utah, studying theater, and quickly gained attention for his sharp presence and emotional depth. Friends from that time recall how he could step into any role, embodying it so fully that audiences forgot they were watching a student on stage. What's striking about Anthony's early life is how grounded it was. Unlike many celebrities swept away by sudden fame, Geary carried the foundation of discipline, humility, and a deep understanding of human struggle, qualities rooted in his upbringing. And perhaps it was this grounding that later allowed him to portray Luke Spencer with such raw, complicated humanity. Behind the bright lights and the applause, there always lingered the echoes of Colville, the small-town boy who never fully felt he belonged in the grand machinery of Hollywood. To truly understand Anthony Geary's tragedy, we must remember that his journey began here, in the quiet streets of Utah, in the arms of a modest family. with dreams that seemed too fragile for the storm of fame that awaited him. Anthony Geary's journey into the entertainment world was anything but straightforward. Like so many forgotten actors who clawed their way into Hollywood, he began with small, often thankless roles that tested both his patience and his determination. After completing his studies in theater at the University of Utah, Geary packed his bags and moved to Los Angeles, a city that promised dreams but delivered struggles in equal measure. In the early 1970s, Geary worked tirelessly in guest roles on television. He appeared in shows like All in the Family, Barnaby Jones, and The Streets of San Francisco. These weren't glamorous roles, but they revealed his versatility. Casting directors quickly noticed something unusual about him. He wasn't the stereotypical leading man. He carried a subtle vulnerability, a sense of internal conflict that made him magnetic on screen. But breaking into Hollywood was brutal. He often auditioned against dozens of other aspiring actors, many of whom fit the classic movie star mold better than he did. Yet Geary possessed something they didn't: an intensity, a rawness, a willingness to take risks. That willingness eventually brought him to the world of daytime television, a space that, at the time, was considered less prestigious than primetime drama, but held immense power over millions of loyal viewers. In 1978, Geary was cast in the ABC soap opera General Hospital as Luke Spencer. Initially, it was meant to be a short-term role, a villain, a dark presence who would stir up trouble and then fade away. But Geary transformed the character into something extraordinary. Luke Spencer became complex, layered, even sympathetic. Viewers were captivated. The chemistry between Geary and Jeannie Francis, who played Laura, electrified the screen. What began as a turbulent storyline evolved into the most famous romance in soap opera history. Their on-screen wedding in 1981 drew an audience of more than 30 million people, a staggering number that eclipsed even primetime network shows. Anthony Giri, once a struggling actor hustling through auditions, was suddenly a household name. But fame wasn't just about glory. With recognition came the weight of expectation. Geary often spoke in interviews about how exhausting it was to be forever identified as Luke. He loved the craft of acting, but he feared being trapped in one role for his entire career. "I never wanted to be a celebrity," he once said. "I wanted to be an actor." Yet, ironically, it was celebrity, fueled by a single role, that defined him. Still, during these years, Geary enjoyed professional triumphs that many actors could only dream of. He won multiple Daytime Emmy Awards, earning critical acclaim for bringing depth and nuance to a genre often dismissed by critics. He gave daytime television legitimacy. He turned soap opera storytelling into something that felt cinematic, tragic, and profoundly human. Anthony Geary's rise to fame wasn't just a personal victory, it was a cultural moment. He embodied the spirit of late 20th century television, where millions of viewers invested their hearts in the lives of fictional characters. But as we will soon see, the same role that gave him everything also took much away. Fame opened doors, but it also built invisible walls around his identity. And at the very height of his success, the world would watch as Luke Spencer and Anthony Geary stepped into a realm of stardom that was as intoxicating as it was perilous. By the early 1980s, Anthony Giri was not just a soap opera actor, he was a cultural phenomenon. Luke Spencer, the character he had reshaped from a short-term villain into a deeply human anti-hero, became one of the most iconic figures in television history. With Jeannie Francis by his side as Laura, Geary stood at the center of daytime TV's greatest storyline, one that blurred the lines between fiction and reality for millions of viewers. The Luke and Laura wedding in 1981 remains legendary. More than 30 million people tuned in, making it the single most watched daytime episode in American television history. For one afternoon, the entire country seemed to pause, united around a soap opera romance. Newspapers covered it as if it were a real event, and fans treated Geary and Francis like members of their own families. In that moment, Anthony Geary wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol of what television could mean to people's lives. Success followed him everywhere. He won multiple Daytime Emmy Awards, not only for his emotional performances, but also for the risks he took in bringing depth and complexity to soap opera storytelling. Critics, who once dismissed daytime television as melodrama, were forced to acknowledge the craft he brought to the screen. Geary gave daytime TV something rare: respectability. Behind the scenes, however, his success was bittersweet. Fame carried a double edge. Geary had always envisioned himself as a versatile actor, someone who could disappear into different roles across genres. Yet Hollywood was not kind to soap stars. The industry often typecast actors, reducing them to the single roles that made them famous. For Geary, Luke Spencer was both a gift and a cage. Despite the limitations, Geary remained committed to excellence. He continued to reinvent Luke, exploring storylines that pushed boundaries. Luke wasn't a flawless hero. He was complicated, conflicted, haunted by his past, and audiences loved him for it. That complexity kept viewers hooked for decades, making General Hospital a fixture of American culture and Geary its beating heart. Financially and professionally, these years were the pinnacle. He was celebrated at award shows, invited to headline interviews, and adored by fans wherever he went. For many, Anthony Geary represented the golden age of soap operas, the proof that even in a genre dismissed by Hollywood elites, greatness could emerge. But as often happens with celebrity icons, the glow of success hid shadows that the public rarely saw. The same role that elevated him to stardom began to erode his sense of self. The pressure of maintaining Luke Spencer's legacy year after year was immense. And though Geary had reached the summit of daytime television, he began to wonder, was this truly the career he wanted, or had he traded freedom for fame? For now, though, in the eyes of the world, Anthony Geary stood at his peak, an icon of television, a star whose name was synonymous with triumph. But as every tragic celebrity story reminds us, the higher the rise, the harder the fall. And for Geary, the next chapter would bring struggles that no Emmy Award could shield him from. At the height of his fame, Anthony Geary should have been celebrating, yet instead, he began to feel suffocated by the very role that had given him everything. Luke Spencer was no longer just a character, he was a prison. Fans demanded Luke every day. Producers clung to him as the lifeblood of General Hospital, and Hollywood executives refused to see Geary as anything else. What if the very thing you dreamed of became the chain that kept you from living freely? That was Anthony Geary's tragedy. Geary had always longed for variety. He didn't want to be remembered for only one face, one story. Yet whenever he tried to step outside of daytime television, he encountered rejection. Casting agents in Hollywood often dismissed soap actors, labeling them as too small screen, incapable of carrying major film roles. For someone with Geary's talent, this was devastating. He felt trapped in a cycle, adored by millions, yet invisible to the industry he wanted most to conquer. The pressures of fame also weighed heavily on his personal life. Unlike many of his co-stars who embraced the spotlight, Geary shunned it. He rarely attended Hollywood parties, avoided publicity stunts, and kept his private life fiercely guarded. Fans speculated endlessly about his relationships, but Geary never confirmed nor denied. This secrecy only fueled curiosity, but it also deepened his isolation. And then came the grind of daytime television itself. Unlike primetime shows, soap operas demanded relentless schedules. Actors filmed almost daily, with minimal breaks, memorizing pages of dialogue overnight. For years, Geary endured this punishing routine, pushing his body and mind to their limits. It won him Emmys, but it also drained him. There was also the controversy embedded in Luke's character itself. The infamous 1979 storyline where Luke assaulted Laura before their romance ignited haunted Geary for decades. At the time, the writers framed it as seduction, but audiences and critics later condemned it as rape. For Geary, this became a moral burden. He defended the complexity of Luke, but admitted in later years that the storyline was a dark stain on his legacy. Carrying that weight, being the face of both daytime TV's biggest triumph and its most controversial moment, was something that gnawed at him quietly. As the years passed, Geary tried to leave General Hospital multiple times. He sought freedom in Amsterdam, where he eventually bought a home, retreating into the canals and cobblestones of Europe whenever the grind became too much. But even then, the shadow of Luke Spencer followed him. Fans recognized him abroad, letters from America arrived at his doorstep, and producers kept calling him back. The B-Kitsch was not just about exhaustion, it was about identity. Anthony Geary, the man, had been swallowed whole by Anthony Geary, the celebrity. And, as he grew older, he began to ask, had he lived a full life, or had he simply played one role for the world to consume? The tragedy deepened in 2015 when Geary finally decided to retire from General Hospital after nearly 40 years. It should have been a moment of peace, but instead, it left a void. Fans mourned the loss of Luke, but for Geary, the goodbye was complicated. He wasn't just leaving a show, he was leaving behind decades of recognition, purpose, and the daily rhythm that had defined him. Retirement for many brings relief. For Anthony Geary, it brought silence. And sometimes, silence can be the loudest tragedy of all. At 78, looking back, the heartbreaking truth is clear. Anthony Geary achieved what few ever could, yet the price was steep. The fame that crowned him also caged him. The applause that once lifted him eventually faded into an echo, leaving him to wonder whether it was worth it. When Anthony Geary walked away from General Hospital in 2015, the cameras stopped rolling, but the silence that followed was almost deafening. For nearly 4 decades, his life had been measured in scripts, studio lights, and the familiar rhythm of portraying Luke Spencer. Without that, he was left to confront the question few stars want to face: who am I without the role that defined me? The truth was harsh. Geary had sacrificed much for his career, while his peers built families, raised children, and balanced their lives between fame and personal joys. Geary's world remained solitary. He never married and he had no children. For some, this might have been a choice. For Geary, it often felt like the inevitable cost of his devotion to acting. He once admitted that the intensity of daytime television left little room for a private life. The applause of millions filled the void for a time, but applause fades. Silence does not. Living much of the year in Amsterdam, Geary found peace in anonymity. The narrow canals and historic bridges provided him with a refuge from the frenzy of Hollywood. Yet even in this quiet, there was an undercurrent of loneliness. Fans might imagine his retirement as idyllic, but for Geary, solitude often brought reflection and regret. He had achieved success beyond imagination, yet in the stillness of his later years, he faced the emotional cost of everything he had given up. One of the most heartbreaking elements of Geary's story is the way fame, once intoxicating, had become alienating. Friends described him as warm but guarded, capable of deep connection but hesitant to let anyone in fully. The weight of being Luke Spencer never left him, and in many ways, it isolated him from living as Anthony Geary, the man. Even professionally, the pain lingered. Though he had won a record 8 Daytime Emmy Awards, Geary never found the broader recognition in film or primetime television he had once longed for. Hollywood's refusal to see beyond Luke Spencer was a wound that never truly healed. He could have been a versatile star, a transformative actor across genres. Instead, he remained confined, remembered almost exclusively for a single character. To someone who had dreamed of embodying many lives, this was a quiet devastation. Adding to the tragedy were his physical struggles. Years of demanding production schedules had taken a toll on his health. He endured back surgeries and the natural decline that comes with age. Each reminder of his body's fragility reinforced the sense of time slipping away, of opportunities missed, of dreams that could no longer be chased. What makes Geary's story especially poignant is the humanity of his struggle. His is not the downfall of scandal, addiction, or public disgrace, like so many tragic celebrity stories. Instead, his tragedy is quieter, more intimate, the loneliness of a man who gave everything to his art, but was left with questions no applause could answer. At 78, Anthony Geary lives far from the cameras, his legacy secure yet shadowed by a profound solitude. Fans still remember him as Luke Spencer, the man who brought romance, excitement, and even controversy to daytime television. But behind the legend is a man who wrestled with the emptiness that fame could never fill. And so the tragedy of Anthony Geary is not one of destruction, but of isolation, the heartbreak of being celebrated by millions, yet deeply alone when the lights finally dimmed. Despite the loneliness and losses, Anthony Geary's story is not without redemption. In many ways, his decision to retreat from Hollywood was not just an escape, but a rebirth. For the first time in decades, he was free from the constant demands of scripts, producers, and the expectations of millions. Retirement allowed him to rediscover something he had nearly forgotten: Anthony Geary, the man, not just Luke Spencer. Amsterdam became more than just a sanctuary. It was a place of quiet healing. In the canals, the art galleries, and the freedom to walk unnoticed through cobblestone streets, Geary found the anonymity he had craved. Here, he was not a celebrity, not a tragic figure of television, but simply a man who loved culture, history, and solitude. He once described Amsterdam as a city that lets you live and let live, a philosophy that resonated deeply with him. This period of reflection gave him a new kind of strength. For years, he had carried the burden of being typecast, of being trapped in one role. Now, far from the spotlight, he came to see Luke Spencer not as a prison, but as a gift, a character who had allowed him to touch millions of lives. For all the pain it brought him, Luke also gave him a place in television history that would never be erased. That recognition, in time, softened his bitterness. Geary also began reconnecting with the craft of acting on his own terms. Though he did not return to television, he involved himself in smaller creative projects, occasionally lending his talents to independent performances or behind-the-scenes collaborations. No longer bound by the weight of expectation, he embraced creativity for the sheer joy of it. In interviews during retirement, Geary spoke with a mixture of honesty and peace. He acknowledged the hardships, the exhaustion, the isolation, the cost of fame, but he also expressed gratitude for the opportunities his career had given him. "I've lived a very privileged life," he said once, "because I got to do what I loved for so long. That's more than most people ever get." This newfound acceptance became his form of resurrection. Anthony Geary may not have returned to Hollywood in the grand sense, but he returned to himself. He found a way to reconcile the paradoxes of his life, the glory and the sorrow, the fame and the loneliness, the triumphs and the regrets. And in this acceptance lies his true redemption. His tragedy did not consume him. Instead, it transformed him into a man who could look back with honesty and forward with peace. While many celebrity stories end in self-destruction, Anthony Geary's path led him to a quieter, more profound kind of victory, the freedom to live life on his own terms, away from the relentless glare of Hollywood. Today, at 78, Anthony Geary lives far removed from the glitz of Hollywood. His home in Amsterdam offers him the peace he longed for during his decades in the spotlight. He wakes without the weight of daily scripts, without the pressure of maintaining Luke Spencer's legacy. For the first time in his life, Geary exists outside the machinery of fame, and perhaps that is the most profound gift of all. Yet, his absence only underscores his impact. Fans still speak his name with reverence. Old clips of General Hospital continue to circulate on YouTube, with younger audiences discovering the cultural phenomenon that was Luke and Laura. Even in an age dominated by streaming platforms and instant content, Geary's performances hold a timeless quality, reminders of a period when television could stop the world in its tracks. His descent is complex. On one hand, he is celebrated as one of daytime television's greatest actors, a man whose portrayal of Luke Spencer redefined what soap operas could achieve. He brought nuance, depth, and moral ambiguity to a genre often dismissed as melodramatic fluff. His record 8 Daytime Emmy Awards stand as proof of his artistry. On the other hand, his career is a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fame can consume identity, how Hollywood can trap even the most gifted talents in roles they never escape. But perhaps the most enduring part of Geary's legacy lies in the emotional connection he forged with audiences. For millions, Luke Spencer wasn't just a character. He was part of their lives, a companion in the afternoons, a witness to their own struggles, triumphs, and heartbreaks. The letters Geary received over the years often spoke of how Luke and Laura's story mirrored the viewer's own romances, challenges, or personal tragedies. Through his performance, Geary became more than an actor. He became a vessel for people's emotions. There are also the unspoken lessons of his journey. His story warns of the dangers of celebrity obsession, but it also highlights resilience, craftsmanship, and the courage to step away. In choosing solitude over the endless pursuit of fame, Geary carved out a legacy not just of acting, but of authenticity. He showed that it is possible, even for a star so closely tied to a single role, to reclaim one's life on personal terms. Hollywood secrets often paint a darker picture of broken stars, but Anthony Geary's story is different. His is a tragic celebrity story, yes, but it is also a human one, layered with contradictions, filled with sorrow and triumph, marked by regret but also gratitude. His descent is not just in the history of television, but in the hearts of those who felt seen, moved, or comforted by his work. In the quiet streets of Amsterdam, Anthony Giri may no longer stand before the cameras, but his shadow lingers in Hollywood. The boy from Colville became an icon, and though his life carries the weight of tragedy, his art remains unforgettable. That, in the end, may be the truest legacy of all. If this story touched you, if the rise and fall of Anthony Giri reminded you of the fragile balance between fame and solitude, then let his journey stay with you. His life shows us that behind every celebrity, behind every glittering success, there are sacrifices we may never fully see. Which part of Anthony Geary's story struck you the hardest? Was it his meteoric rise to fame, the loneliness that followed, or the quiet redemption he found far from Hollywood? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your reflections. And if you want to continue exploring more heartbreaking celebrity stories, more forgotten actors, and more hidden Hollywood secrets, make sure to subscribe. Every week, we uncover the untold truths behind the stars we once admired and the tragedies that shaped their legacies. Anthony Geary's tragedy is more than just one man's story. It's a reminder of the cost of chasing dreams and the quiet strength of reclaiming peace. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.